I'm Dominic, and I showed up to Thanksgiving dinner with my phone in one hand and a pumpkin pie in the other, only to find my entire family gathered around the dining table laughing at a compilation video they'd made. My TikToks, edited together with circus music and a caption that read, Family Cringe Hall of Fame. My brother Brandon wiped tears from his eyes while my mother Trish clutched her wine glass, both of them howling as my ex-fiancé Kyle added his own commentary about how embarrassing it was to have dated someone so desperate for attention. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Then my grandfather Daniel, the only one not laughing, leaned over and whispered in my ear, "Show them the contract you signed yesterday." Ever felt like the punchline of a joke, only to realize you've been writing the last laugh all along? The drive from Portland to Spokane takes about 5 hours if you push it, longer if you stop for coffee, and the kind of self-doubt that creeps in when you're heading toward people who've spent years making you feel small. I left my studio apartment in the Pearl District just after dawn, the November sky still purple and heavy with the threat of rain. My car, a 12-year-old Honda with a check engine light that had been on since July, rattled over the interstate while I rehearsed conversations in my head that I knew would never happen the way I imagined them. Thanksgiving at the Dominic house wasn't optional. It was a command performance, the kind of family obligation that came with expectations and judgments baked into every casserole dish. I'd skipped last year, citing work commitments that weren't entirely false, and the fallout had lasted months. Trish, my mother, had sent passive-aggressive text messages about family loyalty until Christmas. Brandon had made a group chat specifically to mock my absence, complete with a poll asking whether I was too busy being an influencer to care about family. Kyle, who was still somehow invited to these gatherings despite our engagement ending 2 years prior, had sent a single message that simply said, "Typical." So this year, I went. I baked a pie from scratch using a recipe I found on someone else's TikTok, which felt appropriately ironic. I wore a sweater my grandfather had given me last birthday, soft gray wool that made me feel a little less exposed. And I drove with my phone tucked into the cup holder, notifications turned off, because the numbers climbing on my latest video would either make this dinner more unbearable or give me the kind of quiet confidence I desperately needed. The Dominic family estate sat on South Hill, one of those sprawling suburban homes that looked like it belonged in a magazine spread about successful families who had their lives figured out. My father had built his accounting firm from nothing, or so the story went, and the house was his monument to that success. After he passed 5 years ago, Trish had taken over the narrative, redecorating every room until it reflected her taste, which leaned heavily toward beige and control. Brandon had moved into the guest house out back after his divorce, close enough to maintain his position as the golden child, far enough to pretend he had independence. I parked on the street instead of the driveway. Old habit. Taking up space had never felt like something I was allowed to do in this family. The front door was unlocked, which meant I was expected to let myself in like always. No greeting, no acknowledgement of the effort it took to show up. Just the assumption that I would comply. The house smelled like roasted turkey and something floral, one of those expensive candles Trish bulk ordered from a boutique in Seattle. Voices drifted from the dining room, laughter that had the sharp edge of cruelty I'd learned to recognize. I set the pie on the kitchen counter next to 3 other desserts that looked professionally made, which meant mine would likely go untouched. The kitchen was pristine, white marble and stainless steel, the kind of space designed for appearance rather than actual cooking. Trish employed a catering service for holidays now, another status symbol she mentioned frequently to her real estate clients. The dining room opened into a space dominated by a table that could seat 14. Today it held 7. Trish sat at the head, wearing cream-colored silk and her best jewelry. Brandon sprawled in the chair that used to be our father's, his tie loosened, a craft beer sweating onto the polished wood. Kyle sat beside him, because apparently my family had adopted my ex-fiancé more thoroughly than they'd ever embraced me. 2 of Trish's real estate colleagues filled the remaining seats, strangers who'd been invited to witness whatever performance my family had planned. And then there was Daniel, my grandfather, my father's father, tucked into the corner seat near the window. He looked smaller than I remembered, his flannel shirt hanging loose on shoulders that used to seem so solid. But his eyes, pale blue and sharp, found mine immediately. He didn't smile, but something in his expression steadied me. Nobody acknowledged my arrival. Instead, Brandon tapped his phone screen, and suddenly the television mounted on the wall flickered to life. My face filled the screen, mid-dance, the kind of trending audio challenge I'd posted 3 weeks ago. Except someone had edited it. Slowed it down, added a filter that made me look ridiculous, overlaid it with circus music. The room erupted in laughter. Brandon was the conductor of this symphony of humiliation. He narrated each clip as it played, offering commentary that his audience of sycophants rewarded with increasingly loud reactions. There was the video where I tried a cooking trend and accidentally set off my smoke alarm. There was the one where I'd lip-sync to a popular sound, which Brandon described as desperate karaoke. There was the heartfelt clip I'd made about dealing with anxiety, which Kyle said looked like a cry for attention from someone who should probably log off and get a real therapist. Trish dabbed at her eyes with a cloth napkin, shoulders shaking. One of her colleagues, a woman whose name I didn't catch, actually applauded when the compilation ended. I stood in the doorway, pie forgotten, watching myself be dissected for entertainment. My hands didn't shake. My throat didn't close. Somewhere along the way, maybe after the 100th dismissive comment or the 1000th time someone had made me feel foolish for trying, I developed a kind of numbness to this particular flavor of cruelty. Brandon finally noticed me. He raised his beer in a mock toast, his grin wide and careless, the expression of someone who'd never questioned whether his words left scars. "Claire. We were just celebrating your internet fame. You've really made a name for yourself. The family influencer. Dad would be so proud." The sarcasm landed exactly where he intended. Our father had been a practical man, someone who valued stability and traditional success markers. He'd never understood creative pursuits, had openly worried about my lack of direction during college. Brandon knew this. He'd weaponized our father's memory before. Trish set down her wine glass with deliberate care, her smile the kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Sweetheart, we're not trying to be mean. We just think maybe it's time you considered doing something more substantial with your life. You're almost 30. This whole internet personality thing, it's fine as a hobby, but surely you want something more serious." Kyle leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, the posture of someone who felt entitled to judge. I tried telling her that when we were together. She was always on her phone, always chasing the next video idea. It's honestly kind of sad, watching someone prioritize likes over real relationships. The colleagues nodded along, strangers who knew nothing about me but felt comfortable participating in my humiliation because my own family had given them permission. Daniel's chair scraped against the floor. He stood slowly, his hands gripping the table edge, and when he spoke his voice carried a weight that silenced the room. "That's enough." Brandon's grin faltered. Trish's expression shifted toward irritation, the look she got when someone disrupted her carefully orchestrated moments. "Dad, we're just having some fun. Claire knows we love her." Daniel's gaze moved from Brandon to Trish to Kyle, assessing each of them with the kind of quiet intensity one remembered from childhood, when he'd been the one who taught me that disappointment didn't require raised voices. "You've had your fun. Now let the girls sit down and eat." It wasn't a request. Daniel had a way of taking up space without demanding it, of shifting the energy in a room simply by deciding it needed to shift. He'd been a graphic designer for 40 years, built a small agency that he'd sold just before retirement, and he carried himself with the confidence of someone who'd created things that mattered. I moved toward the empty seat beside him, legs steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. As I passed behind Trish's chair, Daniel caught my eye and gave the smallest nod, the kind of gesture that meant we'd talk later, that I wasn't alone in this room full of people who seemed determined to make me feel like I was. Dinner progressed with forced normalcy. Platters were passed, polite conversation was manufactured, and I pushed food around my plate while half listening to Trish describe her latest real estate conquest. Brandon told a story about closing a major deal at work, pausing frequently to ensure everyone understood how impressive he was. Kyle contributed observations about market trends that nobody had asked for, his voice carrying that particular tone of someone who believed his opinions were more valuable than they actually were. I said nothing. I'd learned years ago that silence was safer, that contributing to conversation only provided more ammunition. Instead, I focused on my grandfather beside me, the way he ate with deliberate slowness, the way his hand occasionally trembled when he reached for his water glass. After dinner, while Trish and her colleagues moved to the living room with coffee and my untouched pie, Daniel gestured for me to follow him outside. The November air bit sharp and clean after the suffocating atmosphere of the house. We walked toward his workshop, a converted garage at the back of the property that Trish had tried multiple times to repurpose into something she considered more appropriate. The workshop smelled like sawdust and mineral spirits, familiar and grounding. Daniel's current project, an intricate jewelry box made from reclaimed walnut, sat partially finished on his workbench. He moved toward a filing cabinet in the corner, the kind of battered metal furniture that predated the house's current aesthetic by decades. From the second drawer, he pulled out a folder. Not weathered or dramatic, just a simple manila folder with a tab labeled Claire in his careful handwriting. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He set it on the workbench between us, his hand resting on top like he was protecting something precious. I want you to know something before you open this. Your father, my son, he was a good man in many ways. But he had blind spots. He valued certain kinds of success and couldn't see past his own definitions. After he died, I watched your mother and brother try to fit you into a shape that would never hold. I watched them mock you for trying to find your own path. And I decided that if they were going to treat you like you didn't matter, someone needed to make sure you knew you did. He slid the folder toward me. Inside were printouts. Dozens of them. Screenshots of my TikTok videos, but not the ones my family had mocked. These were different. Comments from followers thanking me for making them laugh during hard days. Messages from brands asking about collaboration. Screenshots of my follower count, dated and tracked over 18 months, showing steady exponential growth. Articles from marketing publications discussing the rise of micro-influencers and featuring my account as a case study. And at the bottom, clipped together with a binder clip, were financial documents. Spreadsheets tracking my earnings, broken down by sponsored posts, affiliate links, brand partnerships, and content licensing. Numbers that made my hands go numb. Numbers that represented income I'd been quietly accumulating while my family assumed I was playing on the internet. Daniel watched me process the information, his expression patient. I'd been documenting this for a year. Every milestone, every achievement they dismissed. You kept telling me it wasn't a big deal, that you were just making videos for fun. But I'm old enough to recognize when someone is building something real, even if they're too scared to claim it. My voice came out smaller than I intended. Why would you do this? Because someone needed to see you. Really see you. Not the version they decided you were, but the person you're actually becoming. The last document in the folder was dated yesterday. A contract summary, signed by me and Leon Martinez, my manager. The brand partnership I'd been negotiating for 3 months, the one I'd been afraid to believe would actually happen. A 6-figure deal with a major consumer brand, 12 sponsored posts over 6 months, plus appearances and content creation consulting. The signing bonus alone was more than Brandon made in half a year. Daniel tapped the paper with one weathered finger. This is what they don't see. This is what they can't see, because they've decided who you are and they're too comfortable with that story to let facts interfere. I looked up at him, this man who'd quietly documented my success while everyone else had compiled my failures, and something inside me that had been held tight for years finally began to unfurl. How long have you known about the contract? Since you told me about the meeting last month. I called Leon myself, asked him to walk me through what it meant. I wanted to understand your world since nobody else in this family bothered to try. The workshop was quiet except for the distant sound of laughter from the house. Trish's colleagues were probably finishing their coffee, preparing to leave, carrying with them the story of the Dominic family and their sad little daughter who wasted her time on social media. Daniel closed the folder with gentle finality. Tomorrow they're planning a family meeting. Trish has been calling it an intervention. She wants to talk to you about getting a real job, maybe using her connections to find you something in real estate admin. Brandon's been referring to it as helping you grow up. Kyle apparently volunteered to attend for moral support. Of course he did. You can walk in there and let them have their intervention. Let them talk at you about responsibility and maturity and all the ways you've disappointed them. Or you can walk in there with this folder and show them exactly who you've become while they were busy laughing. I ran my fingers over the folder's edge, feeling the weight of documented truth against years of accumulated doubt. My grandfather had done what I'd been too afraid to do for myself. He'd taken me seriously when seriousness felt impossible. He'd seen value where everyone else had seen failure. What do you think I should do? Daniel smiled then, the first real smile I'd seen from him all day. I think you should remind them that underestimating people is expensive. And I think you should let me be there when you do it, because I've waited a long time to watch them realize they've been wrong about you. The house lights glowed warm against the darkening sky. Inside, my family was probably settling into their evening routines, comfortable in their certainty, secure in their judgments. They'd successfully humiliated me at dinner, reinforced their narrative, maintained their positions in the hierarchy we'd all been assigned without consent. They had no idea what was coming. I took the folder, held it against my chest like armor, and nodded to my grandfather. Tomorrow then. Let's give them something to really talk about. I woke up in my childhood bedroom at 4 a.m, pulse hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. The room hadn't changed since high school, still decorated with the same pale yellow walls and white furniture Trish had chosen when I was 15. She'd redecorated every other space in the house at least twice, but this room remained frozen, a museum exhibit of who she'd wanted me to be before I'd disappointed her by becoming someone else. My phone glowed on the nightstand, 53 notifications accumulated overnight. Comments on my latest video, messages from followers, 2 emails from Leon about upcoming opportunities. I scrolled through them in the dark, each notification a small reminder that outside this house, outside this family's narrow definition of success, I'd built something that mattered to people I'd never met. One message stood out, timestamped from 3 hours ago. Victoria Ashford, the brand partnership director who'd negotiated my contract, had sent a simple text asking if I was still planning to announce the partnership next week. She'd attached a mock-up of the press release her team had drafted, professional and gleaming with the kind of language that made the whole thing feel impossible and real at the same time. I typed back a response confirming the timeline, my thumbs moving quickly across the screen. Then I opened my camera roll and stared at the photo I'd taken yesterday of the signed contract, the one piece of proof I'd kept separate from Daniel's folder. My signature looked foreign and confident, the handwriting of someone who'd decided to bet on herself even when nobody else would. The intervention was scheduled for 10. Trish had texted the details yesterday afternoon with the kind of precision she used for her real estate closings. Family meeting, main living room, attendance mandatory. She'd included a reminder to dress appropriately, which I understood to mean nothing too casual, nothing that suggested I wasn't taking this seriously. The subtext was clear. I was about to be corrected, and I was expected to accept that correction with grace and gratitude. I showered in the bathroom I'd shared with Brandon growing up, the one where he used to leave wet towels on the floor for me to clean up because enforcing basic courtesy apparently didn't apply to golden children. The house was silent except for the old pipes groaning, everyone else still asleep or pretending to be. I dressed carefully, choosing clothes that felt like armor. Black jeans, a silk blouse the color of charcoal, the leather jacket I'd bought last month after my first major brand payment cleared. I looked like someone who'd figured something out, which was exactly the energy I needed. Daniel was already awake when I came downstairs, sitting at the kitchen table with coffee and the newspaper, a routine he'd maintained for decades. He glanced up when I entered, his expression neutral but his eyes sharp with understanding. "You ready for this?" I poured myself coffee from the pot he'd made, the ceramic mug warm against my palms. As ready as I'll ever be for my family to tell me I'm living my life wrong. He folded the newspaper with deliberate precision. "They're going to try to make you feel small. That's what people do when they're threatened by growth they didn't authorize. Your job is to remember that their discomfort isn't your responsibility." I sat across from him, the early morning light turning everything soft and gray. What if I do this and nothing changes? What if I show them everything and they still don't see me? Daniel reached across the table and tapped the folder he'd placed there, the same one from yesterday now resting between us like a grenade waiting to be thrown. Then at least you'll know. And you can stop waiting for their permission to take yourself seriously. Footsteps creaked overhead. Trish moving through her morning routine, the sound of her heels clicking against hardwood as she prepared for the day's performance. Brandon's voice drifted from somewhere in the house, talking on the phone about some work crisis that apparently couldn't wait until after the holiday weekend. The house was waking up, and with it came the familiar tension of people preparing for conflict while pretending everything was fine. By 9:30, the living room had been arranged like a courtroom. Trish sat in the high-backed chair near the fireplace, the position of authority she'd claimed after my father died. Brandon sprawled on the leather sofa, his laptop open beside him because even family interventions couldn't pull him away from work email. Kyle had stationed himself near the window, arms crossed, playing the role of concerned ex-boyfriend with the kind of dedication that would have been impressive if it wasn't so pathetic. Daniel and I entered together. He carried the folder like it weighed nothing, setting it on the coffee table with a soft thud that somehow commanded attention. I sat in the remaining armchair, the one positioned slightly lower than Trish's, a detail I'd never noticed before but now seemed deliberately chosen. Trish began with a smile, the one she used for clients she was about to manipulate into accepting less than they deserved. "Claire, sweetheart, we asked you here because we care about you. We've been watching you struggle with this social media thing for years now, and we think it's time for some honest feedback." Brandon closed his laptop, giving me his full attention with the condescending focus of someone preparing to deliver hard truths for my own good. "Look, we get it. You wanted to try something different. You didn't want the traditional career path. But at some point, you have to accept that playing on your phone isn't a sustainable life plan." Kyle shifted his weight, his voice carrying that particular tone of false concern he'd perfected during our relationship. "When we were together, I watched this obsession take over your life. You were always filming, always checking your comments, always chasing the next viral moment. It was exhausting to be around. And honestly, from an outsider's perspective, it looked really unhealthy." Trish nodded along, her expression carefully calibrated to suggest empathy while delivering judgment. "We're not saying you have to give it up completely. Hobbies are important. But maybe it's time to think about stability. I've spoken with some colleagues who are looking for administrative assistance. The pay isn't glamorous, but it's steady. You could finally get benefits, start building toward retirement, maybe even think about buying a small condo instead of throwing money away on that rental in Portland." The intervention continued, each of them taking turns explaining why my choices were wrong, why my priorities were misaligned, why I needed to accept their vision for my life before it was too late. They used words like realistic and practical and mature, coding their criticism in language that suggested they were helping rather than diminishing. I let them talk. I sat quietly, hands folded in my lap, watching them perform their concern with the kind of detached observation I usually reserved for analyzing content trends. Brandon gestured emphatically when he talked about fiscal responsibility. Trish kept touching her pearl necklace, a tell that she was enjoying this more than she wanted to admit. Kyle kept glancing at me, waiting for the reaction he'd grown accustomed to during our relationship, the tears or defensiveness that would confirm I was still the person he remembered. When they finally ran out of prepared speeches, when the silence stretched long enough to feel uncomfortable, Trish leaned forward with her closing argument. "We love you, Claire. We want what's best for you. And we think what's best is letting go of this fantasy and joining the real world. Can you do that for us? Can you trust that we know what we're talking about?" I looked at each of them in turn. My mother, who'd spent 5 years redecorating my father's memory to suit her preferences. My brother, who measured worth in salary figures and job titles. My ex-fiancé, who'd left me because my ambitions didn't align with his timeline. 3 people who decided my value based on standards I'd never agreed to. Daniel cleared his throat, the sound cutting through the expectant silence. "Before Claire responds, I think there's some information you should see." He opened the folder with careful deliberation, removing the first stack of papers. "These are engagement metrics from Claire's social media accounts over the past 18 months. Monthly active users, average view duration, follower growth rate, content reach. He spread them across the coffee table like evidence in a trial. Brandon leaned forward, scanning the numbers with the analytical eye of someone who worked in finance. His expression shifted from dismissive to confused. These numbers, they're actually pretty significant. Daniel continued, unbothered by the interruption. This next section documents brand partnerships and collaboration requests. He laid out screenshots of emails from companies, some of whose logos even Trish would recognize from her shopping habits. Major consumer brands, all of them requesting to work with Claire specifically because of her audience engagement and authenticity metrics. Trish picked up one of the printouts, her perfectly manicured nails leaving slight impressions on the paper. I don't understand. These are real companies. Very real. And they're willing to pay substantial amounts for Claire's influence. Which brings me to this section. The financial spreadsheets came next, numbers highlighted in yellow to make them impossible to ignore. Monthly earnings broken down by revenue stream, showing consistent growth that had accelerated dramatically in recent months. The totals at the bottom of each page told a story my family hadn't bothered to ask about. Kyle's voice came out strained. This can't be accurate. Nobody makes this kind of money posting dance videos. I spoke for the first time since the intervention began, my voice steady and clear. I don't post dance videos. I create lifestyle content focused on mental health, creativity, and finding joy in small moments. My audience is primarily women between 25 and 40 who are navigating career transitions and personal growth. Brands partner with me because I have a 92% engagement rate and my followers trust my recommendations. Brandon was doing math in his head. I could see him calculating, comparing my income to his own. You're telling me you make this every month? Just from TikTok? TikTok, Instagram, YouTube, brand partnerships, affiliate marketing, content licensing, and consulting. I've diversified my revenue streams because contrary to what you all believe, I actually do think about sustainability and long-term planning. Daniel pulled out the final document, the one I'd been both dreading and anticipating. And yesterday, Claire signed a 12-month contract with a major wellness brand for a 6-figure partnership that includes creative direction consulting and exclusive content creation. He laid the contract summary on top of the pile, my signature visible at the bottom, official and binding and impossible to dismiss. The room fell silent. Trish's carefully constructed expression crumbled into something between shock and anger. Brandon sat back hard against the sofa cushions, his laptop forgotten. Kyle moved away from the window, coming closer to the coffee table as if proximity would reveal the documents to be fake. Trish recovered first, her voice sharp. Why didn't you tell us about any of this? The question hung in the air, loaded with accusation disguised as hurt. I met her eyes, feeling something shift in my chest, a tectonic plate of suppressed frustration finally breaking free. When would I have told you? During the family dinners where you complained about my life choices? During the holidays where Brandon made jokes about my unemployment? Maybe I should have mentioned it yesterday when you were all laughing at videos of me trying to build something you couldn't understand? Brandon held up his hands, trying to regain control of the narrative. Okay, look, this is clearly a miscommunication. If we'd known you were actually making money, we would have approached this differently. That's exactly the problem. You didn't think to ask. You assumed. You decided I was failing and you committed to that story so completely that you turned my life into entertainment without ever wondering if you might be wrong. Kyle stepped forward, his expression shifting into something that might have been regret if I trusted him enough to believe it. Claire, I had no idea things had gotten this serious. If I'd known, I never would have said those things about your career. My career existed whether you knew about it or not. My success didn't need your awareness to be real. And the fact that you're only taking me seriously now that you've seen dollar amounts says everything about how you actually value people. Trish stood abruptly, the movement sharp and defensive. This is incredibly unfair. We're your family. We're allowed to have concerns about your choices. Concerns require questions. What you did was pass judgment. There's a difference. Daniel remained seated, watching the scene unfold with the quiet satisfaction of someone who'd waited a long time for this moment. He caught my eye and gave the smallest nod, a gesture of approval that steadied me more than any of their belated apologies could have. Brandon ran his hands through his hair, his usual confidence replaced by something resembling embarrassment. So what happens now? You just go back to Portland and we all pretend this conversation never happened? I gathered the papers from the coffee table, stacking them neatly before returning them to the folder. What happens now is I stop waiting for you to understand. I stop shrinking myself to fit into whatever version of me makes you comfortable. And I build my career with or without your approval, because I've already proven I don't need it. Trish's voice cracked slightly, anger bleeding through her composure. After everything this family has done for you, this is how you speak to us? After everything? I paid my own way through college after Dad died and you decided my degree in communications was a waste of money. I found my own apartment when you suggested I was too old to live at home but never actually offered to help with rent. I built this career alone while you actively mocked me for trying. So yes, after everything, this is exactly how I speak to you. The living room felt smaller suddenly, the walls closing in on years of swallowed words and suppressed anger. I stood, tucking the folder under my arm, and looked at each of them one final time. I came here yesterday because family is supposed to matter. Because some part of me still hoped you might surprise me. But you showed me exactly who you are, and I'm finally ready to believe you. Daniel rose from his seat, moving to stand beside me with the solidarity of someone who'd chosen his allegiance long before this confrontation. We'll be leaving now. Claire has meetings to prepare for, actual business to conduct. I trust you can manage cleaning up after yourselves for once. We walked toward the door together, my grandfather's hand light on my shoulder, and behind us the silence was deafening. No apologies, no attempts to call us back, just the heavy quiet of people realizing they'd miscalculated badly and had no idea how to fix it. Outside, the November air felt cleaner than it had in years. Daniel's old truck sat in the driveway, paint faded but engine reliable, and we climbed in without speaking. He started the ignition, the radio crackling to life with classic rock, and we pulled away from the house while I watched it shrink in the side mirror. We drove in silence for several miles before Daniel spoke, his voice casual as if we'd just finished running ordinary errands. You hungry? There's a diner about 20 minutes from here that makes decent pie. I realized I was starving, hadn't eaten anything since yesterday's dinner that I'd barely touched. Pie sounds perfect. The diner was exactly the kind of place Daniel loved, worn booths and laminate tables and a waitress who called everyone honey without irony. We ordered coffee and 2 slices of apple pie, and when the food arrived I discovered I was hungrier than I'd realized. Daniel ate slowly, watching me with the same patient observation he'd always offered. You did good back there. Said things that needed saying. I don't feel good. I feel like I just blew up my entire family. Your family blew itself up the moment they decided loving you was conditional on you being who they wanted instead of who you are. You just finally stopped pretending it was normal. The coffee was terrible and perfect, bitter and hot and grounding. I wrapped both hands around the mug, letting the warmth seep into my palms. What do I do now? Daniel smiled, reaching across to tap my phone where it sat face down on the table. You do exactly what you've been doing. You keep building. You keep creating. You stop wasting energy on people who refuse to see you and you invest in the ones who already do. And maybe, if your family ever figures out what they lost, you'll decide whether they deserve a second chance. But that's future Claire's problem. Today's Claire just needs to finish her pie and drive home. The drive back to Portland felt different than the journey there. Daniel insisted on following me in his truck, claiming he wanted to see my studio apartment and make sure I was settled before heading back to Spokane. We stopped twice, once for gas and once because he spotted a roadside stand selling late-season apples and decided we needed a bag. The normalcy of it, the simple act of buying fruit with my grandfather while the world continued spinning, felt revolutionary after the morning's explosion. My apartment building sat wedged between a coffee roaster and a vintage furniture shop, the kind of neighborhood that had gentrified just enough to be expensive but still maintained some character. I'd moved here 2 years ago, right after Kyle and I split up, choosing the smallest unit I could afford because I'd needed my own space more than I'd needed square footage. The rent ate a significant portion of my income back then, but it was mine, and that had mattered more than financial prudence. Daniel climbed the 3 flights of stairs behind me, moving slower than he probably wanted to admit, and when I unlocked the door he stepped inside with the careful attention of someone trying to understand a life through its surroundings. The apartment was small, but I'd made it work. My filming corner occupied the space near the window where natural light flooded in during golden hour. Equipment that had started with a phone tripod had gradually expanded to include a ring light, a small microphone, and a backdrop I'd sewn myself from fabric remnants. The rest of the space held the accumulated evidence of someone building a life alone. Thrifted furniture I'd refinished. Plants in mismatched pots. A bulletin board covered in sticky notes tracking content ideas and posting schedules. My laptop lived on a folding table that doubled as my desk, surrounded by notebooks filled with video scripts and brand partnership tracking. Daniel moved through the small space, pausing at the bulletin board. "You've built something here. Not just the content, but a whole system." I filled a kettle for tea, my hands busy with familiar motions. I had to. Nobody was going to do it for me. He settled into the armchair I'd reupholstered last spring, the one piece of furniture I'd truly loved enough to invest time in saving. "That's not a complaint, I hear. That's recognition." The kettle whistled and I poured water over tea bags, Earl Grey for me and chamomile for Daniel. We sat in comfortable silence, the kind that only exists between people who don't need to fill every moment with words. Outside my window, Portland moved through its afternoon rhythms. Footsteps on the sidewalk below. The hiss of the espresso machine from the coffee roaster. Traffic sounds that had become white noise. My phone buzzed against the table, breaking the quiet. Leon's name appeared on the screen with a message asking if I was available for a call. I glanced at Daniel, who waved me toward the phone with an encouraging nod. Leon's voice came through warm and energetic, the enthusiasm of someone who'd built a career on recognizing potential before it became obvious. "Claire, I've been getting messages all morning. Victoria from the wellness brand wants to move up the announcement timeline. Apparently their marketing team is more excited than they initially let on, and they want to capitalize on momentum before the holidays." I put the phone on speaker so Daniel could hear, his presence somehow making the conversation feel more real. "How much are they talking about moving it up?" "They want to announce next Monday. Full press release, social media campaign, the works. They're also asking if you'd be willing to do a joint Instagram live with their CEO to talk about the partnership vision. It's aggressive, but the exposure would be significant." Daniel leaned forward slightly, his attention focused on the phone. "What does that mean for Claire in practical terms?" Leon's pause suggested he was recalibrating for an unexpected audience. "Who am I speaking with?" "This is my grandfather, Daniel. He's been helping me document everything." Leon's tone shifted, gaining a layer of respect. "Well, Daniel, in practical terms it means Claire's profile is about to increase significantly. This brand has 12 million followers across platforms. A partnership announcement will put her in front of an audience she hasn't accessed yet. It also sets her up as someone major brands want to work with, which affects her negotiating position for future deals." "And the risks?" Daniel asked, his business instincts evident despite decades in a different industry. "The main risk is expectation management. Once you're associated with a brand at this level, your audience watches closely. Any misstep gets magnified. But Claire's been building authentic engagement for years. Her foundation is solid." I wrapped both hands around my tea mug, feeling the weight of the decision. "What do you think I should do?" Leon didn't hesitate. "I think you should say yes and then trust yourself. You've earned this. Time to stop acting like you're waiting for permission." After the call ended, Daniel and I sat in the settling quiet of the apartment. The afternoon light had shifted, casting long shadows across the floor. My phone showed 17 new notifications, a mix of comments on recent videos and messages from followers. The machine I'd built kept running whether I was paying attention or not. Daniel stood, moving to the window to look out at the street below. When I started my design agency, I spent the first 5 years convinced someone was going to realize I was making it up as I went. Imposter syndrome, they call it now. Back then I just thought I was a fraud who'd gotten lucky. You never seemed unsure of anything. That's because I learned to trust my work even when I didn't trust myself. The designs were good because they were good, not because I believed they were. Your content works because it connects with people. That's not luck or accident. That's skill you've developed. My laptop sat closed on the folding table, hiding the spreadsheets and analytics I reviewed obsessively. Behind that screen lived proof of growth and engagement, numbers that would have seemed impossible 2 years ago. But numbers didn't silence the voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like Trish asking when I was going to get serious about my life. Daniel turned from the window, his expression shifting into something more businesslike. Show me your content calendar. I want to understand how you're planning for this partnership announcement. I opened my laptop and pulled up the spreadsheet where I tracked everything. 3 months of planned content mapped out, color-coded by platform and content type. Brand partnerships highlighted in blue, personal content in green, collaborative projects in yellow. Daniel leaned over my shoulder, scanning the organized chaos with an analytical eye. You're scheduling 4 months in advance? 3 to 4 months. It gives me buffer time if something doesn't work or if opportunities come up that require flexibility. He tapped the screen where I'd marked the wellness brand partnership. This announcement happens Monday. What's your content strategy around it? I pulled up a separate document, one I'd been working on for weeks. Pre-announcement teaser content to build curiosity. The official announcement video scripted to feel authentic rather than corporate. Behind-the-scenes content showing my genuine excitement. Follow-up videos integrating the brand naturally into my existing content themes. A timeline that extended 3 months past the initial announcement. Daniel read through the strategy, nodding slowly. This is comprehensive. Have you shown this to Leon? He approved it last week, but I keep second-guessing whether it's too much or not enough. It's exactly enough. You're treating this like a business because it is one. The fact that you're filming yourself doesn't make it less legitimate than what Brandon does sitting behind a desk moving money around. My phone buzzed again, this time with a text from a number I didn't immediately recognize. The message was brief, but the name at the bottom made my stomach flip. It was from a producer at a major morning talk show, asking if I'd be interested in discussing my content creation journey and the changing landscape of digital careers. They wanted to feature emerging creators who were redefining professional success. I showed the message to Daniel, my hand trembling slightly. They want me on national television. Then you say yes and prepare like you've been preparing for everything else. Thoroughly and honestly. What if I freeze? What if I get on camera and suddenly sound like an idiot trying to explain why posting videos is a real career? Daniel closed my laptop gently, forcing me to look at him instead of the screen. You've been on camera hundreds of times. You've built an audience of people who trust you enough to take your recommendations and buy products you suggest. You've negotiated contracts with major brands and come out with terms that favor you. The only difference here is the size of the platform. The skills are the same ones you already have. The light in the apartment had gone golden, late afternoon sliding toward evening. Daniel needed to drive back to Spokane before it got too late, but he seemed reluctant to leave, as if his physical presence was somehow protecting me from the weight of what came next. We ordered takeout from the Thai place downstairs, splitting pad CEW and spring rolls while sitting on my small balcony that barely fit 2 chairs. The city spread out below us, lights beginning to flicker on as dusk approached. Somewhere in this city were thousands of people who watched my videos, who felt connected to a stranger sharing thoughts on their phone screens. The intimacy of that connection had always felt both powerful and fragile. Daniel finished his food and set the container aside, his attention shifting to something more serious. I need to tell you something about this morning. About why I documented everything the way I did. I waited, sensing this was important. After your father died, I watched Trish and Brandon rearrange his memory to suit their needs. They turned him into this figure of traditional success, this monument to conventional achievement. But your father was more complicated than that. He struggled with anxiety his whole life. He second-guessed his decisions constantly. He built that accounting firm because he was good at it, but he never loved it the way they pretend he did. I'd never heard Daniel speak about my father this way, with such unflinching honesty. When you started creating content, when you chose something unconventional, I saw your father's anxiety in you. That fear of being wrong, of wasting time, of disappointing people. But I also saw something he never quite managed. You did it anyway. You felt the fear and you built something despite it. My throat tightened. I don't feel brave. I feel like I'm constantly one mistake away from everything falling apart. That's not weakness. That's awareness. The people who worry they might be frauds are usually the ones doing real work. It's the people who never question themselves you have to watch out for. Below us, a couple walked past holding hands, their laughter drifting up toward the balcony. The city felt alive in the way it always did at this hour, transitioning from day to night, work to rest, one version of itself to another. Daniel stood, gathering the empty takeout containers. I should head back before the drive gets too dark. But I want you to promise me something. Anything. Stop measuring your success against their definitions. Brandon's career path isn't more valid than yours just because it looks more traditional. Trisha's approval isn't worth more than your own. And Kyle's opinion stopped mattering the moment he chose to leave rather than grow with you. I walked him down to his truck, the November air sharp after the warmth of the apartment. He pulled me into a hug, the kind he used to give when I was small and the world felt too big to navigate. Call me after the announcement on Monday. I want to hear how it goes. I will. And thank you for this morning. For everything in that folder, for coming with me, for staying when everyone else left. He climbed into his truck and rolled down the window. That's what family does. Real family, anyway. The kind you choose and the kind that chooses you back. I watched his taillights disappear down the street before climbing back upstairs. The apartment felt different when I entered, more like a command center than a hiding place. My filming corner waited with its careful lighting and positioned camera. My laptop held strategies and schedules and the accumulated work of years spent building something from nothing. I made a fresh cup of tea and opened my laptop, pulling up the partnership announcement video script I'd been revising for days. The words on the screen felt both mine and foreign, a version of myself I was still learning to claim. Confident without arrogance. Proud without apology. Professional while maintaining the authenticity that had built my audience in the first place. My phone showed a text from Leon with talking points for the morning show interview request. Another message from Victoria asking if I had time for a prep call before Monday's announcement. A notification that my most recent video had crossed 500,000 views. The machinery of my career continued advancing, indifferent to my internal doubts. I responded to Leon confirming Monday's timeline. I told Victoria I'd make time for the prep call. I thanked several followers who'd left particularly thoughtful comments on recent content. Each action felt like casting a vote for the version of myself I was becoming, the one who took her work seriously even when nobody else had. The evening stretched ahead, quiet except for the ambient noise of the city. I could film content, work on upcoming scripts, or simply rest in the knowledge that I'd survived the morning's confrontation and emerged with my resolve intact. Instead, I found myself pulling up old videos, scrolling back through 2 years of content to see the progression I'd been too close to recognize. The early videos were rough, shaky camera work and uncertain delivery. But even then, something authentic came through. A willingness to be vulnerable, to share the messy process of figuring things out rather than presenting polished perfection. That honesty had connected with people who were also navigating uncertainty, who needed permission to be works in progress rather than finished products. Gradually the technical quality improved. Better lighting, clearer audio, more confident editing. But the core remained consistent. Content that felt like a conversation rather than a performance, vulnerability balanced with hope, struggles shared alongside small victories. I'd built trust slowly, video by video, showing up consistently even when growth felt glacial. Now those early followers had become a community. They showed up in comments offering support to each other. They shared my content with friends who needed encouragement. They bought products I recommended not because I told them to but because they trusted my judgment. That trust was the real currency, more valuable than follower counts or engagement metrics. A message appeared from a username I recognized, someone who'd been following since my first month creating content. The message was simple but it landed with unexpected weight. I showed my mom your video about creative careers today. She's been dismissing my photography work for years. After watching, she asked to see my portfolio. Thank you for giving me language to explain why this matters. I read the message 3 times, feeling the responsibility of it settle alongside the validation. This was why the work mattered. Not the brand deals or the income or the vindication of proving my family wrong. It mattered because somewhere a young photographer had just gained ground in a conversation that had been eroding their confidence for years. I typed a response, keeping it genuine and brief. That's beautiful. Your work deserves to be taken seriously, and I'm glad I could help with that conversation. Keep shooting. The city lights had fully emerged now, Portland glowing against the darkness. My small apartment with its careful arrangements and accumulated equipment felt less like a limitation and more like exactly what I needed. Everything essential was here. The tools, the strategy, the determination, and slowly, finally, the belief that I deserved the opportunities I'd worked to create. Monday's announcement would change things. The morning show interview would expand my visibility. Future partnerships would build on this foundation. But tonight, in the quiet space between what had been and what was coming, I allowed myself to simply exist in the present. No performance, no content, no documentation. Just a woman in her apartment, drinking tea, watching her city, and recognizing that she'd become someone she might actually be proud of. My phone buzzed one final time. Daniel's message was characteristically brief. Proud of you, kiddo. Always have been. I set the phone down and finished my tea, letting his words settle somewhere deep where doubt had lived for too long. Tomorrow I'd start preparing for Monday's announcement. Tomorrow I'd review talking points and practice authenticity until it felt natural. Tomorrow I'd continue building the career my family still didn't quite understand. But tonight, I'd done enough. Tonight, I'd finally stopped apologizing for taking up space. Monday morning arrived with the kind of nervous energy that made coffee feel redundant. I'd been awake since 5, running through talking points and checking equipment setups with the obsessive attention of someone who understood that today would either validate years of work or expose me as someone who'd gotten lucky. The partnership announcement was scheduled to go live at 9, coordinated across 3 platforms simultaneously with the brand's marketing team handling the technical execution while I focused on my own content response. Leon called at 7:30, his voice carrying the caffeinated enthusiasm of someone who thrived on launch days. Victoria's team just sent over the final graphics. They look incredible. Professional but still authentic to your aesthetic. You're going to want to save these for your portfolio because this is the kind of work that attracts more work. I had my laptop open on the kitchen counter, 3 browser tabs displaying different social media platforms, each one ready to publish the moment the brand released their announcement. My filming setup was positioned by the window where morning light was most forgiving, camera charged and tested, backup battery sitting nearby because preparation meant anticipating failure points. How are you feeling? Leon asked, and I appreciated that he actually seemed to want an honest answer rather than reassurance. Terrified. Excited. Like I might throw up. All of it simultaneously. That's exactly right. If you weren't nervous, I'd be worried. This is a significant moment. Let yourself feel it. The brand's announcement went live at 9 exactly. Their social media accounts posted simultaneously, professional photography of their product line alongside images they'd commissioned of me, carefully art directed to look candid. The copy was polished but maintained my voice, talking about mental wellness and intentional living and finding joy in daily rituals. Within minutes, comments began flooding in, a mixture of congratulations from existing followers and curiosity from the brand's audience encountering me for the first time. I posted my response video at 9:15, the timing deliberate to let the brand's announcement gain initial traction. I'd filmed it yesterday, scripted but delivered in the conversational tone my audience expected. Talking directly to camera about why this partnership mattered to me, how the brand's values aligned with the content I'd been creating, acknowledging the surreal feeling of reaching this milestone while staying grounded in the community that had made it possible. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments arrived faster than I could read them, a cascade of support and excitement and questions about what came next. My follower count started climbing in real time, hundreds of new people arriving through the brand's announcement and deciding to stay. Analytics showed the video being shared across platforms, picked up by content aggregators and industry newsletters that tracked influencer partnerships. Leon called back at 10. We're getting interview requests. 3 different podcasts want you this week. That morning show producer moved you to priority booking. And I just got an email from another major brand asking if you're available for partnership discussions next quarter. My hands were shaking as I typed responses to comments, trying to maintain the personal connection that had built my audience while managing volume that made individual replies impossible. This was the success I'd worked toward, the validation I'd craved, and it felt exactly as disorienting as I'd feared it might. Around 11, my phone rang with a number I recognized but hadn't expected to see. Brandon's name appeared on the screen, and for a long moment I considered letting it go to voicemail. But curiosity or maybe some remaining thread of familial obligation made me answer. His voice came through careful, stripped of the usual condescension. Claire. I saw the announcement. It's everywhere. Marketing blogs are covering it, industry newsletters. Even some of my colleagues were talking about it this morning. I waited, offering nothing, making him work for whatever this conversation was supposed to be. Look, I owe you an apology. What we did on Thanksgiving, the intervention, all of it. I didn't understand the scope of what you were building. I made assumptions based on ignorance and I'm sorry. The apology sounded rehearsed, like he'd written it down and practiced delivery. I leaned against the kitchen counter, watching notifications continue streaming across my laptop screen while my brother tried to rebuild a bridge he'd helped burn. Why are you calling me now? Why not Saturday after Daniel showed you the numbers? Brandon exhaled, a sound that might have been frustration or shame. Honestly? Because I needed time to process what an idiot I'd been. And because Trish has been calling me non-stop since your announcement went live. Her real estate friends are asking about you. People she knows from the country club are mentioning your content. She's realizing she completely misread the situation. So this apology is coming from embarrassment, not actual recognition that you treated me terribly. Maybe both can be true. Maybe I'm embarrassed because I'm recognizing how terrible I was. I moved to the window, looking down at the street where people moved through their Monday mornings unaware that mine was tilting into something unfamiliar. Brandon, I appreciate the call. But an apology that only comes after public success isn't really an apology. It's damage control. He was quiet for a moment, and I could picture him in his home office, surrounded by the markers of success he'd always valued, realizing those markers didn't translate to the landscape I'd been navigating. What would a real apology look like? It would have come before I proved anything to you. It would have included questions about my work instead of judgments. It would have acknowledged that your understanding of success is limited to what you've experienced, and maybe that's not the only valid framework. Fair enough. That's fair. His voice had lost its careful polish, becoming something more genuine. For what it's worth, I watched some of your content this morning. Actually watched it instead of mocking it. You're good at this. You connect with people in a way that feels real. I can see why brands want to work with you. Thank you. That means more than the apology did. After Brandon hung up, I sat with the strangeness of the conversation. An olive branch extended from a place of self-interest rather than genuine growth, but still, an acknowledgement that their narrative had been wrong. It didn't erase the years of dismissal or the cruelty of Thanksgiving, but it suggested that sometimes being undeniably successful was the only language certain people understood. Victoria called shortly after to discuss the Instagram Live scheduled for Wednesday. The brand's CEO wanted to have an organic conversation about creativity and entrepreneurship, positioning the partnership as a meeting of aligned values rather than a transactional exchange. We spent 30 minutes outlining potential discussion points, Victoria emphasizing authenticity while I tried not to laugh at the irony of scripting spontaneity. The afternoon blurred into a series of tasks that all felt important and urgent simultaneously. Responding to partnership inquiries Leon forwarded. Filming additional content to maintain my posting schedule while managing the announcement momentum. Checking analytics that showed trajectory curves I'd only seen in aspirational case studies. Somewhere in the chaos, I realized I'd forgotten to eat lunch, sustaining myself on coffee and adrenaline. Around 4, a delivery arrived. The package was small, professionally wrapped, with a card tucked into the ribbon. I opened it to find a vintage camera ornament, delicate glass painted to look like the film cameras Daniel used to collect. The card was in his handwriting, precise letters that conveyed affection through restraint. Proof that you've been building something beautiful all along. Don't forget to document today, it matters. I set the ornament on the shelf near my filming area where I'd see it every time I recorded. A reminder that someone had believed in me before I'd proven anything, that family could be chosen based on who showed up rather than who shared DNA. My phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. The message identified itself as from Kyle, explaining he'd gotten my new number from Brandon. The text was long, dense with explanation and justification, essentially arguing that his earlier criticism had come from caring even if his delivery was flawed. He suggested meeting for coffee to discuss how we might support each other's professional growth now that we were both clearly successful in our respective fields. I deleted the message without responding. Some bridges deserved to stay burned. The evening brought a different kind of exhaustion, the satisfaction of survival mixed with the knowledge that this was now my baseline. The morning show interview was scheduled for Thursday, requiring preparation and travel to their studio in Seattle. Future content needed planning around increased expectations. Partnership deliverables demanded attention to detail that honored both my brand and theirs. The machinery I'd built was accelerating, and I needed to prove I could maintain pace. Daniel called at 7, his timing impeccable as always. Big day. How are you holding up? I'm not entirely sure yet. Everything happened so fast. I went from obscure creator to someone major brands are watching in about 8 hours. That's not accurate. You went from obscure creator to someone major brands are watching over 2 years of consistent work. Today was just the day everyone else noticed. Brandon called to apologize. Trish has apparently been fielding questions from her social circle about me. Daniel made a sound somewhere between amusement and disgust. Let me guess. The apology came packaged with excuses and arrived only after you'd proven yourself impossible to ignore. You know your family well. I know that people who measure worth in external validation struggle when the metrics shift and they're suddenly on the wrong side of success. Brandon built his identity on being the accomplished one. Your achievements threaten that narrative, so now he has to recalibrate. We talked for an hour, Daniel asking detailed questions about the partnership announcement and upcoming interview, me gradually unwinding from the day's intensity. He understood better than anyone what it felt like to build something creative in a world that valued conventional markers of success, to be dismissed until the work became undeniable. Before we hung up, he circled back to Thanksgiving weekend. You know they're going to try to claim credit for your success eventually. They'll rewrite the story, suggest they always believed in you, maybe even imply they pushed you toward this path. Let them. I know what's true. You know what's true. That's enough. That night I couldn't sleep despite the exhaustion. My mind replayed the day's cascade of events, analyzing decisions and responses, worrying about maintaining momentum while staying authentic. Around midnight I gave up on rest and opened my laptop, pulling up the analytics dashboard that showed real-time engagement across platforms. The numbers were staggering. Video views in the hundreds of thousands, new followers in the thousands, engagement rates holding steady despite the influx of new audience members. Comments ranged from longtime followers celebrating my success to newcomers asking questions about my content journey. Industry accounts had started following me, their attention suggesting I'd crossed some invisible threshold into legitimacy. I drafted and deleted 3 different Instagram posts, trying to capture gratitude without seeming performative, excitement without arrogance, acknowledgement of the milestone without losing sight of the community that made it possible. Eventually I settled on something simple. A photo of my filming setup with Daniel's ornament visible in the frame, caption thanking everyone who'd been part of the journey and promising to honor their trust as opportunities expanded. The post went live and immediately started accumulating likes and comments, positive reinforcement that felt both wonderful and slightly overwhelming. Somewhere in the digital crowd were the people who'd been there from the beginning, who'd watched me fumble through early videos and supported me through content experiments that failed. They deserved credit for this success as much as I did, their engagement providing the proof that brands needed to take me seriously. Tuesday morning I woke to an email from the morning show producer with interview prep materials and scheduling details. The segment would be 7 minutes, longer than typical guest spots because they wanted to explore the changing landscape of digital careers and how creators were redefining professional success. They'd found my content through the partnership announcement and saw an opportunity to feature someone at an inflection point in their career trajectory. Leon called while I was reviewing the prep materials. This is the kind of visibility most creators spend years trying to achieve. Network morning shows reach millions. You need to be sharp, authentic, and ready to articulate why your work matters beyond the metrics. What if I freeze? What if I get on camera and suddenly sound defensive about my career choices? Then you'll sound like every other person who's ever been questioned about choosing an unconventional path. The difference is you have proof that your choices worked. Let the success speak for itself and focus on connecting with people watching who might be considering their own creative risks. I spent Tuesday filming content for the rest of the week, front-loading production so Thursday's interview wouldn't derail my posting schedule. The filming felt different now, weighted with the knowledge that new audience members were watching, that brands were evaluating my consistency, that I'd raised expectations and needed to meet them. The pressure was both motivating and paralyzing. Wednesday's Instagram Live with the brand's CEO went better than expected. Victoria had coached me extensively, but the actual conversation flowed naturally, touching on creativity, mental wellness, and building work that aligned with values. The CEO was genuine in her enthusiasm for the partnership, emphasizing that they'd chosen me specifically for my authentic approach rather than just my metrics. The live stream peaked at 15,000 viewers, comments flooding in faster than I could track. Afterward, Victoria sent a message that included praise from the brand's executive team and a hint that they were already discussing extending the partnership beyond the original contract terms. Success building on success, momentum creating opportunities that hadn't existed the previous week. Thursday morning I drove to Seattle for the interview, arriving at the studio with an hour to spare. The green room was smaller than I'd imagined, holding 2 other guests waiting for their segments. A best-selling author sat reviewing notes, completely calm. A local chef paced while talking on his phone, nervous energy radiating outward. I fell somewhere between them, anxious but prepared, terrified but capable. The segment producer came to walk me through what to expect. The host would ask about my content creation journey, the recent partnership announcement, and broader questions about digital careers. They wanted authentic responses rather than polished sound bites, real conversation that viewers could connect with. 7 minutes felt simultaneously too long and insufficient to capture 2 years of work. Makeup and hair took 20 minutes, transforming my careful preparation into television-ready polish. I watched the monitor showing the live broadcast, studying the host's interview style with the author. She was warm but direct, asking follow-up questions that dug beneath surface answers. This wouldn't be a puff piece celebrating my success. She'd push for substance. When my turn came, I walked onto the set with the same determined energy I brought to filming content in my apartment. The lights were brighter than I'd anticipated, the camera presence more intimidating than my phone tripod. But the host's genuine smile as I sat down helped ground me, her introduction framing my work as part of a larger shift in how people build careers. "Tell me about the moment you realized content creation could be more than a hobby," she began, and I found myself explaining the evolution from desperate experimentation to strategic business without the defensive edge I'd worried would emerge. The interview flowed through topics I'd prepared for and tangents I hadn't anticipated. She asked about family support, a question that landed with particular weight given recent events. I navigated it carefully, talking about my grandfather's belief in my work while acknowledging that not everyone understood creative careers until they saw traditional success markers. What would you say to someone watching right now who's considering leaving a conventional career path to pursue something creative but feels terrified? The question hung in the bright studio air, and I thought about every person who'd sent me messages saying my content had given them courage. I'd say the terror is information, not a stop sign. It tells you that what you're considering matters to you, that you're risking something real. But terror about potentially failing is still less painful than regret about never trying. Build slowly if you need to. Keep your day job while you develop your craft. But don't let other people's limited imagination for your life convince you that conventional is the only valid path forward. The segment ended with the host thanking me and mentioning where viewers could find my content. 7 minutes that had felt like both an eternity and an instant, an experience I'd prepared for extensively and still felt unprepared to navigate. Walking off set, I had no idea if I'd represented myself well or exposed my insecurity to millions of people. Leon called before I'd even left the building. You were perfect. Authentic without being rehearsed, vulnerable without seeming fragile, confident without arrogance. This is going to drive significant traffic to your platforms. I sat in my car in the studio parking lot, hands shaking from adrenaline crash, and watched my phone notifications explode with messages from people who'd seen the segment. New followers arriving in waves. Brands reaching out through official channels. Media outlets requesting comments for articles about the creator economy. The 7-minute interview had opened doors I hadn't known existed. The drive back to Portland felt surreal, the landscape familiar, but my relationship to it fundamentally altered. I'd driven this route dozens of times, always as someone trying to build something others didn't take seriously. Now I was returning as someone network television had featured, someone major brands wanted to partner with, someone whose choices were being validated in ways my family had insisted would never happen. My phone rang as I crossed into Oregon. Trisha's name on the screen, calling for the first time since Thanksgiving weekend. I let it ring through to voicemail, not ready for whatever conversation she thought we needed to have. The voicemail notification appeared moments later, and curiosity made me listen. Her voice was carefully modulated, the tone she used with difficult real estate clients. Claire, sweetheart, I saw your interview this morning. You were wonderful. Poised and articulate. I wanted to call and tell you how proud I am. I know things were tense over Thanksgiving, but family is family. We should talk soon. Maybe lunch next time you're in Spokane. Call me back. I deleted the voicemail and kept driving, watching Portland's skyline emerge in the distance. Proud now that pride was convenient, interested now that my success was undeniable. The same pattern Brandon had followed, apology arriving only after public validation made dismissal impossible. The weeks following the morning show interview moved with a velocity I hadn't anticipated. Opportunities arrived faster than I could properly evaluate them, each one requiring decisions that would shape my career's trajectory. Leon scheduled calls back to back, walking me through partnership proposals, speaking engagement requests, and podcast interview offers. The machinery I'd built was running at capacity, and I was learning in real time whether my foundation could support the weight. 3 weeks after the interview aired, I sat in a coffee shop in Portland's Alberta Arts District, laptop open to a spreadsheet tracking revenue projections for the next quarter. The numbers were abstract in their size, representing income that would have seemed fictional 6 months ago. Brand partnerships stacked on top of each other, affiliate revenue climbing as my audience expanded, consulting opportunities emerging from companies wanting to understand creator marketing. My phone buzzed with a message from Daniel asking if I was free for dinner next weekend. He'd been checking in regularly since Thanksgiving, casual check-ins that carried the subtext of making sure I wasn't drowning in success the way some people drown in failure. I confirmed the plans and added it to my calendar, color-coded green for personal time in a sea of professional obligations. The coffee shop filled with afternoon regulars, people working remotely or meeting friends, the ambient noise of a city going about its business. I'd filmed content here before, the exposed brick and large windows providing good natural light. The baristas knew my order, recognized me from my videos, treated me with the casual friendliness reserved for neighborhood fixtures rather than minor celebrities. A woman approached my table, her posture suggesting nervousness carefully controlled. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but are you Claire Dominic? Your content helped me quit a job that was destroying my mental health. I just wanted to say thank you for being honest about how hard creative work can be. It made my transition feel less terrifying." We talked for 10 minutes, her sharing her story of leaving corporate marketing to pursue freelance illustration, me offering what encouragement felt genuine rather than performative. These interactions had become more frequent, strangers recognizing me and wanting to share how my work had impacted their decisions. The responsibility of it settled heavy and purposeful, a reminder that content reached beyond metrics into actual human lives. After she left, I returned to the spreadsheet, but my focus had shifted. The numbers represented security and validation, but they weren't the point. The point was connection, permission giving, the subtle work of helping people trust themselves enough to take risks others might not understand. Leon called during my walk home, his voice carrying news I could hear in his tone before he said the words. "We got an offer from a publishing house. They want you to write a book about building a creative career in the digital age. Advance is substantial and they're offering a 2-book deal if the first performs well." A book. Physical, permanent, existing beyond the ephemeral scroll of social media. The validation felt different than partnership deals or television appearances, carrying weight that came from traditional publishing's enduring cultural cachet. "What's the timeline?" "They want a proposal within 6 weeks and the full manuscript in 8 months. It's aggressive but manageable if you treat it like the structured project you are." I'd never considered myself a writer beyond video scripts and caption copy, but the challenge felt right. A book would let me explore ideas too complex for short-form content, reach people who didn't engage with social platforms, create something that could exist independently of algorithms and platform changes. Tell them yes. I'll make the timeline work. That evening I started outlining the book in a notebook I'd bought specifically for the project, treating it with the reverence reserved for important undertakings. Chapters emerged around themes I'd been exploring in content but never fully developed. Imposter syndrome in creative fields. Building financial sustainability without compromising authenticity. Navigating family relationships when your success doesn't fit their frameworks. Each chapter title represented conversations I'd had in comments, questions followers asked repeatedly, territory I'd mapped but never properly documented. December arrived with Portland's characteristic gray drizzle, the city settling into winter's quiet introspection. Holiday content required planning and execution, brand partnerships had deliverables tied to seasonal campaigns, and the book proposal demanded attention. I worked with the focused intensity of someone who understood that momentum required maintenance, that opportunities closed as quickly as they opened. Trish called 3 more times over those weeks, each voicemail carrying variations of the same message. Pride in my success, desire to reconnect, suggestions that family should support each other. I didn't return the calls, not out of spite but because I'd learned that some relationships couldn't be salvaged and the effort of trying drained energy better invested elsewhere. Brandon sent a text asking if I'd consider doing a joint interview with him about sibling dynamics and different definitions of success. He'd apparently pitched it to a business podcast he'd been featured on before, positioning it as an interesting angle on family and career choices. I declined politely, recognizing the request as another attempt to associate himself with my visibility rather than genuine desire for reconciliation. Kyle's periodic messages continued arriving, each one carrying the assumption that my success somehow vindicated his earlier criticisms or proved he'd been right to push me toward conventional achievement. I stopped reading them after the first few, his inability to comprehend that my success existed despite rather than because of his influence becoming tedious rather than hurtful. The book proposal came together over late nights and early mornings, spare hours carved from a schedule that had no natural gaps. I wrote about the Thanksgiving intervention without naming family members, framing it as illustrative of broader cultural tensions around creative work. The proposal included sample chapters, market analysis Leon helped research, and a clear argument for why this book needed to exist in a landscape saturated with surface-level content about following dreams. The publishing house accepted the proposal within a week, contract negotiations moving swiftly once Leon and their team aligned on terms. I signed the contract in my apartment, Daniel present via video call, the moment feeling significant enough to warrant witness. He toasted with coffee while I used tea, both of us acknowledging the strangeness and rightness of reaching milestones he'd always believed possible while I'd been convinced they were fantasy. Christmas approached, and with it the expectation of family gatherings I had no intention of attending. Trish sent a formal invitation to Christmas Eve dinner, the kind of heavy cardstock summons she used for real estate client events. The invitation included a handwritten note about putting the past behind us and moving forward as family. I sent a polite decline, citing work commitments and prior plans, neither of which was entirely true but both of which were more honest than pretending reconciliation was possible or desired. Instead, I spent Christmas Eve filming content in my apartment, creating a video about chosen family and finding home in communities built on mutual support rather than blood obligation. The video resonated deeply, comments flooding in from people navigating similar tensions between biological family and the relationships they'd intentionally cultivated. By Christmas morning, it had become my most viewed content, shared widely by people who needed permission to prioritize their peace over family expectations. Daniel came to Portland for New Year's, the first time he'd visited since helping me move into the apartment 2 years ago. We spent the week between holidays walking the city, visiting Powell's books where he bought 5 volumes he didn't need, eating at restaurants I'd featured in content. He wanted to see my life rather than hear about it, to understand the geography of my daily existence. On New Year's Eve, we sat on my small balcony wrapped in blankets against the cold, watching fireworks bloom over the city. The year had transformed everything, taking me from someone apologizing for her choices to someone building a career that didn't require justification. The success felt earned but fragile, requiring constant attention to maintain. Daniel sipped bourbon, his gaze on the distant celebrations. Your father would have struggled to understand what you've built. He was too rooted in his own frameworks. But he would have been proud once he saw it was real. The observation landed without judgment, acknowledging my father's limitations while honoring whatever love had existed beneath them. I thought about the man who'd worried about my lack of direction, who'd suggested practical careers with clear advancement paths, who'd died before seeing me find traction in work he wouldn't have valued. Do you think he'd have come around eventually? Like Brandon is trying to now? Daniel considered the question seriously. Maybe. Your father could change his mind when confronted with evidence, but it took overwhelming proof. Brandon's learning the same lesson, that dismissing people is expensive when they succeed despite you rather than because of you. The new year arrived with noise and light, the city celebrating transition with the optimism unique to arbitrary calendar markers. I thought about the person I'd been 12 months ago, driving to Thanksgiving dinner with pie and dread, still hoping family might surprise me with support. That version of myself felt distant now, separated by growth that had been painful and necessary. January brought the book's writing phase, deadline pressure adding structure to days already dense with content creation and partnership deliverables. I wrote in the mornings before filming, treating the manuscript like the serious project it was. The work felt different than video scripts, requiring sustained argument and deeper exploration, but the core skill remained the same. Understanding audience needs and meeting them with honesty. Leon called in mid-January with news that a major tech company wanted me to speak at their annual conference about building authentic online communities. The speaking fee was substantial, the exposure significant, and the opportunity to position myself as an expert rather than just a creator. I accepted and immediately started preparing, researching the company and crafting a presentation that would translate my experience into actionable insights. The speaking engagement happened in February, a ballroom full of marketing professionals and content strategists listening while I talked about vulnerability, consistency, and trusting audience intelligence. The presentation went well, questions afterwards suggesting genuine interest rather than polite obligation. Several attendees approached me after, business cards exchanged, conversations initiated that would lead to future opportunities. Walking out of the conference center, I realized I'd stopped waiting for someone to expose me as a fraud. The work was real, the expertise earned, the success built on foundations solid enough to support scrutiny. Imposter syndrome hadn't vanished, but it had diminished, relegated to occasional whisper rather than constant scream. Spring arrived gradually, Portland's gray yielding to cherry blossoms and longer days. The book manuscript was due in May, pages accumulating steadily as I maintained content output and managed expanding partnership portfolio. The balance felt precarious but sustainable, exhausting but purposeful, the kind of tired that came from building rather than surviving. Daniel called in April asking if I'd considered what came after the book launched. Not in terms of career planning but in terms of personal goals, relationships beyond work, life architecture that included rest and connection. The question surprised me, his concern suggesting I'd been too focused on professional momentum to consider what else I wanted. I don't know. This past year has been about proving I could do this, about building something undeniable. I haven't thought much past that. Maybe it's time to think about it. Success isn't just professional. It's also knowing what you're working for beyond external validation. The observation settled uncomfortably, highlighting gaps in my life I'd been too busy to acknowledge. Dating had been non-existent, friendships maintained sporadically, personal interests sublimated to content creation. I'd built a career at the expense of everything else, and while the career was thriving, the rest of my life felt underdeveloped. I started making small changes. Blocking personal time on my calendar with the same protection I gave work commitments. Reaching out to friends I'd neglected, rebuilding connections that had atrophied. Filming less, resting more, recognizing that sustainability required balance I'd been avoiding. The book manuscript was submitted in early May, 8 months of work condensed into 300 pages that felt both comprehensive and incomplete. My editor loved it, suggesting minor revisions that would strengthen arguments and clarify structure. The launch was scheduled for September, giving the publisher time for editing, design, and marketing preparation. Summer unfolded with the rhythm I'd been working toward, content creation that felt sustainable rather than frantic, partnerships that aligned with values rather than just revenue, opportunities selected with strategic clarity. The career I'd built was functioning, generating income that exceeded my needs, providing flexibility to make choices based on fit rather than desperation. In late June, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize but a name I knew. The message was from someone who'd been in my high school class, someone I barely remembered but who apparently remembered me. She'd seen my content, followed my career trajectory, and wanted to interview me for an article about our hometown's notable alumni. The request was strange and flattering, evidence that success had circled back to the place I'd left. I declined politely, recognizing that returning to excavate my past held no appeal. The person I'd been in high school bore little resemblance to who I'd become, and creating continuity between those versions of myself felt unnecessary. Some stories didn't need completion, some circles didn't need closing. August brought the book's advance copies, physical proof of work that had existed only digitally. I held the book with the reverence reserved for milestones, running fingers over the cover design, flipping through pages that carried my name as author. Daniel's copy arrived before mine, an early edition the publisher sent at my request, and he called immediately after opening it. I read the dedication, his voice carrying emotion he rarely displayed. To Daniel, who saw me before I saw myself. That's accurate and appreciated. The book launched in September with coordinated marketing across platforms, interviews with podcasts and media outlets, content timed to drive awareness and sales. The launch week was chaotic, monitoring sales rankings and review aggregators, doing virtual events with bookstores and online communities. By the end of week 1, the book had hit several bestseller lists, performance exceeding publisher expectations and validating the year's work. Reviews were largely positive, readers responding to the honesty about creative work's difficulties alongside celebration of its possibilities. Critics appreciated the lack of false inspiration, the acknowledgement that unconventional careers required different skills than conventional ones but weren't inherently superior or inferior, just different. One review stood out, published in a trade magazine Brandon subscribed to for his finance work. The reviewer praised the book's practical framework while noting that the author's success might make her advice less accessible to people still struggling. The criticism was fair, acknowledging that surviving and thriving required different strategies, that my current position gave me perspective impossible to access in earlier stages. I thought about that review for days, considering whether success had distanced me from the struggles that had shaped my understanding. The tension felt unresolvable, my experience now filtered through achievement that transformed memory into something more digestible than the raw uncertainty of beginning. October arrived and with it the anniversary of last year's Thanksgiving disaster. I'd planned nothing special, treating it like any other week, but Daniel called suggesting we mark the occasion deliberately. He proposed dinner in Portland, just the two of us, acknowledging how far I'd traveled in 12 months. We met at a restaurant I'd mentioned in content, the kind of place that felt special without pretension. Over slow food and good wine, we reviewed the year's progression from intervention to book launch, from family mockery to professional validation. The distance covered felt impossible, compressed time creating the illusion that change had been faster than it actually was. Daniel raised his glass in toast. To the long game. To building when nobody's watching and trusting that good work eventually becomes undeniable. We clinked glasses and drank, the moment simple but weighted with shared understanding. He believed in my work before proof existed, documented my progress when I'd been too close to see it, stood beside me when standing alone would have been easier. That loyalty, freely given and consistently maintained, meant more than any professional achievement. As we finished dinner, my phone buzzed with a message from Trish. The text was brief, acknowledging the book's success and suggesting we should talk. No apology for the intervention, no recognition of the damage their mockery had caused, just acknowledgement now that my success was too public to ignore. I showed Daniel the message. His expression didn't change, but something hardened in his eyes. You don't owe her anything. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not even a response. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is let people live with the consequences of underestimating you. I deleted the message without responding, the action feeling final in a way previous deletions hadn't. This wasn't avoidance or delayed processing. This was choosing peace over the exhausting work of rehabilitating relationships built on conditional acceptance. Some bridges deserve to burn, their destruction making space for stronger structures built on better foundations. Walking back to my apartment that night, Portland streets quiet under October's chill, I thought about the version of myself who'd driven to Thanksgiving dinner 12 months ago. That woman had been hungry for validation, desperate to be seen, willing to shrink herself if it meant belonging. She'd sat through humiliation hoping for crumbs of acceptance from people who'd already decided her worth. That version of myself felt distant now, not erased but evolved, the same core person who'd learned she didn't need permission to take herself seriously. The career I'd built existed independently of family approval, the community I'd cultivated offered support unconditional on achieving their definition of success, the life I'd created reflected choices I'd made rather than paths others had prescribed. My apartment welcomed me with familiar comfort, equipment and workspace arranged for tomorrow's filming, the book's advance copy sitting on the shelf beside Daniel's ornament. This space had witnessed the full arc of transformation, from desperate experimentation to sustainable career, from apologizing for existing to claiming space confidently. I made tea and settled on the small balcony, watching the city's lights compete with stars barely visible through urban glow. Somewhere out there were people who'd watched my content today, found encouragement in my honesty, felt less alone in their unconventional choices. The work reached beyond me, creating ripples I'd never fully trace, giving permission I'd desperately needed someone to give me years ago. The career would continue evolving, new opportunities arriving, challenges emerging, the constant negotiation between authenticity and growth. But the foundation was solid now, built on work that mattered, community that sustained me, and the hard-won knowledge that other people's limited imagination for my life didn't define its possibilities. I thought about sending Trish a response after all, something gracious and final that would close the chapter cleanly. But clean endings were fiction, real life offering only the messy work of choosing daily which relationships deserved energy and which needed release. I'd made my choice, drawing boundaries that protected the life I'd built, and that was enough. The tea cooled in my hands as the night deepened. Tomorrow would bring more content to create, more partnerships to manage, more people reaching out to share how my work had impacted them. The machinery I'd built would keep running, requiring maintenance and adaptation, but no longer requiring justification. I'd spent years trying to prove to my family that my choices were valid, that creative work could be serious, that unconventional paths could lead to meaningful destinations. But the real work hadn't been proving anything to them. It had been proving it to myself, building confidence through accumulated evidence, trusting my judgment even when others didn't. The city continued its evening rhythm, indifferent to my small moment of reflection. Somewhere Brandon was probably working late, measuring worth in quarterly reports and title promotions. Somewhere Trish was likely entertaining clients, her success tied to property values and commission percentages. Somewhere Kyle was convincing himself his life was exactly what he'd planned. They were all building their versions of success using frameworks that made sense to them, and that was fine. But I'd built something different, something that didn't require their comprehension to be real, something that existed because I'd decided it could despite every voice suggesting otherwise. That difference, that stubborn insistence on defining success for myself, had been worth every moment of doubt and struggle. I finished my tea and stood, ready to go inside and rest before tomorrow's work began again. The balcony door slid shut behind me, separating the contemplative night from the productive morning waiting just hours away. I had content to film, partnerships to honor, a career to maintain. But first, I had earned the simple satisfaction of existing in the life I'd built, no apologies required, no explanations necessary. Just me, my work, and the knowledge that sometimes the best revenge is building something beautiful while the people who doubted you are still trying to understand what happened. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.